Welcome back to the Elias Macko Show. It's 10:20 right here on CJAD 800. Now, in July of last year, Tim Hortons app users received an email regarding a lawsuit settlement. The staple coffee chain was part of a national class action lawsuit when it was uncovered that their app tracked vast amounts of information from Canadians throughout the years. After further investigation, Tim Hortons was found to have violated privacy laws with their app, and now app users are receiving a settlement for their private data being breached. One free hot beverage. Oh, but wait, there's more. One free baked good. So you get a coffee and you get a donut. Celebrate that, right? Honestly, it's laughable, right? As that's compensation for your privacy being infringed. Why is your private data, why is your privacy worth so little in the Canadian justice system? Well, let's find out some more. Elodie Meyer joins us, a cybersecurity lawyer. Elodie, welcome to the program.
Hi, Elias. Thank you for having me.
So what's your reaction when you hear, hey, listen, Tim Hortons did some not so good stuff with their app, and at the end of the day, they're going to give users a coffee and a donut? What's your reaction? I'm laughing, but maybe I shouldn't be.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. It is laughable at this point. A lot of people have called it a very Canadian type of settlement, right? Coffee and a donut isn't going to do much for Canadians' privacy. But maybe the less laughable part here is that all this happened in 2019, 2020, just before Quebec introduced new privacy laws. Under new privacy laws, Tim Hortons wouldn't get away with it this easily. So we are actually making improvements on that part. But as of today, well, Tim Hortons managed to get away with teensy slap on the wrist.
Okay, so that is very interesting here. Let's get into that for a second now. So let's say the exact same thing happened this year. Now that we've got these new laws in Quebec, how would this been dealt with under Quebec's new laws?
Yeah, so under Quebec's new laws, Tim Hortons could have been fined a lot more. We're talking about $25 million or 4% of their worldwide turnover, the greater of both amounts. So obviously a lot more than a donut and a coffee. That would have had to go to court, though. And here, what's important to note in this class action settlement is that it never went to court. Tim Hortons never really... they continued denying throughout that they did all of these things that the privacy commissioners are saying that they did. And so we would have had to go to court. But if they went to court, they could have had fines upwards of $25 million, like in Europe. Maybe you're familiar with GDPR in Europe. Was a similar law that passed.
So Elodie, actually, that would be a great thing to actually talk about here, right? Because I'm familiar with it in the fact that whenever I go to websites now, they ask me to click on OK, and I just click on OK because I want to get to my information faster here. And it has to do with that European law. But why don't you tell our listeners about that and how that does affect things?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big elements of that law, and we did the same in Quebec, is consent. And that's where those pop-ups come up. So you consent to these websites tracking all sorts of information. And by giving your consent, that's where the companies can do a bit more of what they want with your data. Unfortunately, most people don't actually read through the consent and don't know what they're agreeing to. But at least it's a step forward in the sense where people are being asked and they do have the option to opt out and not give their consent on these privacy issues. Now we see in Europe, they've actually started fining big companies. We think of big tech companies, obviously Meta, Amazon, Google have been fined multiple times, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of euros worth of fines. We're talking about 300 million euros for Google, about 500 million for Facebook, and then about 700 million euros for Amazon. These things don't happen in Quebec yet, but eventually the law was adopted in Europe 4 years ago. So we're thinking maybe 4 or 5 years down the line in Quebec, maybe we'll see similar types of fines. You know,
Elodie, is something you bring up here. We're talking to cybersecurity lawyer Elodie Meyer about a settlement in the Tim Hortons app lawsuit here. Something you bring up, with the Tim Hortons app, even if it's in 2019, I bet you there was that pop-up that the iPhone or Android gives you. Will you share your information, your location, that kind of thing? Why, and I'm sure people clicked on OK in this app. But what did Tim Hortons do that even with getting that OK, what did they do with data that they still weren't telling people in this case?
So Tim Hortons was what's being said, and again, they have admitted to nothing. But what's being said is that they were requesting consent. That wasn't actually what they were doing with the data. And so mainly location services, they're saying, okay, well, when you accept location services to be turned on for the app, you're accepting this only for when you're using the app. And you expect that once you close the app, the Tim Hortons app is not following you around anymore. And it was discovered by a journalist, actually, that this wasn't true, that even though he closed the Tim Hortons app, the app was still following him around and had a very precise understanding of where he worked, where he lived, the bar that he went to the most, and things like that. So that's really where Tim Hortons was in the wrong here, if they actually did what we're saying they did, is that the consent that they were asking for wasn't actually a proper consent for what they were doing with the information.
And I know they haven't admitted wrongdoing here, but is what Tim Hortons was doing, even if they won't admit wrongdoing, was it exceptional? Like, were they the ones that got caught, but every app is doing it?
Oh, it's a bit hard to tell, but I would say that yes, I think that they got caught, but it's quite common actually, and we see it more and more. For people who have iPhones, at the top of the iPhone, there's like a little arrow that will tell you that location services are turned on. It won't tell you for which app. So if you have a bunch of different applications on your phone, you can know that, okay, even though all my applications are turned off, my location services are still on, but it'll be hard to know exactly which application is actually using the location services. And here in Tim Hortons' case, it's really a journalist actually that realized for him personally that this application had a lot more information than just the information that they required consent for. And so he went in and investigated, and all of it came to light. But I think that if other journalists were to investigate other companies, they would find similar issues.
And I sort of think, it's unfair to ask every single user to keep track of every single thing an app is doing with their data. It would be impossible when I look at, I think I have 300 apps on my phone, right? So does this come, Elodie, in your opinion, does this come down to governments actually need to take this seriously and make those regulations to protect everyone? Because if we leave it to individual users to make sure every check mark is checked properly, it's going to be very hard for the average person to do this on their own.
Yeah, I agree. The average person doesn't have proper knowledge of the ins and outs of information security and privacy laws and things like that. We can't expect them to do all of the work. I think there is... governments do have a role to play, and they are. Currently, they're moving around, maybe not fast enough, but privacy is a very complex issue, and the issue that we've had over the years is that technology has developed extremely fast, and privacy was never a concern. Mm-hmm. Even information security as a whole was always kind of on the back burner or second tier, and was never the way that applications were built. So today, there's a lot of work that has to be done by tech companies actually to be able to comply with privacy. And we're talking more and more about something they call privacy by design, where applications would be made in a way to protect the privacy of the users, and that they'd have to opt in intentionally if they wanted to give out as much information as they give out currently. But we saw it with Facebook, for example. People over the last 10 years have put all of their personal information on Facebook and made it publicly available to whoever wants to access their Facebook profile. Essentially, it's a lot about changing mentalities of the people as well, of people realizing the importance of their private information and what they have to do to safeguard that information.
Last question for you, and it has to do with what rights do we have to ask companies to delete the data they have on us? So after the fact, maybe I did say okay, and maybe I did give them approval. Do we have any rights under the law to go to, whether it's big social media companies or it's fast food chains, to say, hey, you got my data, get rid of it now?
Yeah, so actually that's part of what was part of what's coming into force in September of this year with the provincial law. You'll be able to call up a tech company and ask them to delete all of the data that they have on you. Theoretically, they're also supposed to do it once they ask for consent, and once they've done whatever they said that they were going to do with your data, they're supposed to delete it as well. Fortunately, we see that not happening a lot. But as of September of this year, people will be able to contact the companies directly and ask them to remove the data. And I said tech companies, but I'm thinking all companies, actually. Yeah. Any company, you go to the store and they ask for your email address to send you your receipt by email. You can also request for that information to be deleted afterwards.
It's so interesting because now every company has to be a tech company in a certain way, right? Just to survive, you got to be a tech company in some way. Listen, it's great to hear that the laws are changing, that coffee and a donut as a settlement won't happen, hopefully won't happen again in the future with some changes. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
That's Elodie Meyer, a cybersecurity lawyer.